So this was an idea that was brought to us by one of our listeners, Michael. And it was really interesting looking at this just because it's sort of we thought it would be a more common thing than it really was. And there's really not that much evidence of guys skipping the minor league system altogether and just going straight from being an amateur to being a professional in the major leagues.
Right. What Michael was asking was guys that had other jobs that went to the majors, and so I think about all those years ago tryouts and stuff like that, where you'd have public tryouts and the dream of showing up at the stadium and getting on the team.
Or you think about another sport, Kurt Warner coming out of the grocery store aisles to be.
Well, he did play Arena League football.
True,
but yeah, and so and of course the Tigers famously struck in the early 1900s, before 1910, when Ty Cobb went in the stands and beat the hell out of somebody. So they basically suspended him, and then in support of him, the team struck. So they had to hire a bunch of scabs to come out and play there. And the Tigers got obviously walloped, it was 30-0 or something like that. But it was like the plumber. And so that stuff happened in not quite funny baseball time, but over 100 years ago.
It's still interesting thinking that could even happen. That you had what was essentially amateurs playing a team of professionals, but for that day they were pro baseball players.
So we turned it into, as you pointed out, was okay. So how about guys who never got to play a minor league game and went straight to the bigs?
Straight to the bigs. And I mean, it's not something that's altogether that common for a bunch of reasons. One, that there is actually a benefit to the minor leagues in terms of getting guys ready, especially because the level of pitching you face in college is just nowhere near what you end up facing in the professional leagues. And for most young hitters, I think it's just too much of a jump to go straight from not being in the majors to facing major league pitching.
And we'll talk about, breaking it down, before 1965 when the major league draft started. So before that, you had guys that go straight to the major leagues, but there was always a minor league for them to play in,
right?
Even if they weren't affiliated until around the 30s when Branch Rickey started the whole farm system.
Right, so there's a little bit more wiggle room there, because for what a guy playing for some independent team in some independent league wasn't technically a professional major league baseball player, but he was still a guy playing professional baseball in a sense. So it's different than a lot of these guys that you talk about after 1965, where these are all young kids or international players basically coming out of nowhere and going straight to the major leagues.
Right, and even before then, from 1901 though, you had the reserve clause. So that's why Branch Rickey had the wherewithal to create the farm system, because these are assets that these guys had, and you couldn't get a guy, out of the organization because he was bound to the organization for his entire career, which is crazy.
Well, I mean, it's great for the organization, but that's why we like free agency so much, because the players basically being slaves to the organization from the moment they're picked up is.
Thank you, Kurt Flood,
yeah,
for what you did, because that had to stop.
And I think also there is an element of, more so with baseball than just about any other sport, you really have a big difference between what you're doing at the amateur level in terms of games per season jumping up to professional baseball. It's a bigger jump than I feel like just about any sport, just because it's so many more games you're playing.
That's such a great point. We made it in a podcast not too long ago when we had the occasion to meet Ron Darling, and one of his comments was minor league baseball doesn't prepare players to play in the major leagues from the standpoint of playing 6 games in 7 days or 7 games in 7 days in 2 or 3 cities or whatnot. The minor leagues don't have that many games played over that fast a period of time.
He was saying they go play a couple games somewhere, then they get on the bus and they go back and play some more games. Maybe you go on a road trip or 2 throughout the season. But for the most part, you're not really going that far, and you're never going for that long.
So think about the guys that, that then the idea of coming into the major leagues, never having played in the bigs before, and all of a sudden you're playing 162 games. Or you hope you're playing 162 games.
Or you hope you're even playing. You're not just on the team for 162 games.
And that's what makes being a baseball player obviously so different from being a player in any other of the 4 major sports in the United States.
You're playing double the games, basically.
At the least, right? Forget about football being that way. And so the seasons, though, you have a 6-month NBA season altogether with training camp and hockey and football. So the length of the seasons, maybe baseball's a little longer because of spring training.
But you're playing so many more games in that time period.
And so that the idea that you could bring up an 18-year-old kid and have this kid be able to adapt to the lifestyle of traveling and doing what they do if he is a rookie or a
Right,
young
and it's
player
going
on
to
the
be,
team.
and being 18 on a major league team has to be a really isolating experience.
I'm sure A-Rod could tell us about that because I think about that a lot and how he managed, with his supreme talent at 18 to be if you're going to be an 18-year-old player like Alex Rodriguez was, you want to play all the time because it makes no sense to call up a kid like that and have him sit in a dugout and watch.
Right, but you're 18, so you can't relate with your 30-year-old teammates in the same way. You can't go out with them after the games. You kind of just have baseball, and there's going to be some guys that can thrive in that environment. But if you're not playing, it's going to be hard to keep focused and stay, on the straight when you've got more money than you've ever had in your life before. Essentially, no supervision, and it's not like you're going to play the next day anyway after the 8th game in a row of sitting.
Yeah,
So-
and it's been, there's more help for these young players now, right, to have people around them instead of, not knowing what to do, and you have all this money and you got nobody advising you, you don't know who to trust.
It's better now, but I mean, it's still not easy.
It's still not easy. Well, it's not easy to know what to do,
Right.
If you're a young player. And so, in recent years, since 1965, you would have thought that the draft might have allowed people to get to the major leagues more quickly. That really hasn't been the case. Of course, it's only been, it's been almost 60 years. And if you take the 60 years before that or whatnot, there's about as many players.
It's about as many
right,
players.
I thought that was really interesting
yeah.
that went straight to the majors. So the most recent player, and I don't know I don't know this player. I knew the other guy. 2020 was the last time a guy went straight to the big leagues. Now, you can be in college and go straight to the bigs. So that wasn't really something that happened.
Almost happened with Evan Carter this year. Actually.
Right. I'm trying to think. So Lou Gehrig played famously for Columbia, and I think he pretty much. This is a weird thing that happened with Lou Gehrig. He played in 1922 some games where he took an assumed name to get to play the game so that he wouldn't ruin his amateur status. They found out, and then suspended him for a year at Columbia where he couldn't play in the games because he was taking, he had played as a professional, even though they paid him like $2, to play baseball at the time. And so he came up with the Yankees the year after that in 1923 finally. So he didn't go straight to the bigs, but kinda. Yeah. And so, but today, there are very few guys that Evan Carter's the most recent guy that didn't even make it. He didn't even play.
But who? No, Evan Carter played. You mean, but I don't think he went straight to the big leagues.
Oh, well, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that he didn't. He was.
I don't think he did. He might have actually. I'm not 100% sure.
So I remember this guy as a college player. Again, Mike Leake had a great NCAA tournament.
But who was
went
the most?
straight there.
Leake wasn't the most recent, right?
He was 4 or 5 months before Garrett Crochet.
I have no idea who that is.
No, neither do I, and I don't even know if Garrett Crochet is still playing Major League Baseball. Actually. He went to Tennessee. I can't tell if he's still playing or not. And that's the thing. We'll talk about, these 2020 guys and getting into the major leagues. Did it have anything to do with it being a pandemic season? I don't think so.
Right.
Because before that, Leak was 2010.
Yes.
Okay, so it's 10 years. And then 10 years before that, it was Xavier Nady.
Interesting. So it seems like it's like a guy kind of comes every 10 or
in
so
that,
years.
In that sense, 10 years. It happened more frequently before that, and some of the names, Ariel Prieto, who was a Cuban player. So then you see the guy's playing in Cuba. He might have been playing professional baseball in Cuba, but he didn't play in the minor leagues.
Right.
So it kind of gets around it in a way. I mean, let's face it, all the Japanese players,
right, but
all the Korean League players
for me,
didn't play in the minor leagues.
No, but they were playing in another professional league, so I feel like it's not fair to count that.
No, totally not. Darren Dreifert, you talked about this. Darren Dreifert was a pitcher, came up in 94, but before that in 1989, two guys came up. Jim Abbott, who went from college at Michigan, the one-armed pitcher, and pitched a perfect game in the major leagues, amazingly.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yep. And John Olerud, who you said might be one of the greatest college players of all time.
Right. He was considered to be one of the greatest college players to all time. And then like 3 weeks later, after graduating college, he's in the majors hitting baseballs.
So because he had that kind of special output, he got the chance to go straight to the majors, and he's stuck.
Right.
So there are times guys go straight to the majors. They come out of college. They have this amazing college career.
A lot of the guys we've named so far. I mean, Mike Leake's had an okay career.
Oh, you're being very kind.
I know. Xavier Nady, I think we would probably describe as much of the same.
Yeah, well, he did play for the Mets, so you knew it had to go down someplace.
But other than that, they really weren't. I mean, Jim Abbott probably had the best career.
One of them, I'd say so.
Yeah.
The guy before him was Pete Incaviglia. You probably don't know him, but he was a big, burly Oklahoma State. I remember we went to college for some reason. Slugger, and he hit like a bunch of home runs like in his first year, and then he was just kind of okay. I think he had like 100-odd career home runs, and never was the power hitter they thought coming out of college. When they also would blame you for having aluminum bat power, like Robin Ventura got blamed for having. Well, we don't know if he's going to be able to have that translate into the major. It worked out fine for Robin Ventura,
just fine.
So, but the other names that I can keep going back: Brian Milner, I didn't really know. Tim Conroy. Before that, Bob Horner, third baseman, played college baseball in 1978 at Arizona State. Has the distinction of being one of the few guys to hit 4 home runs in a major league game.
Oh, so he went straight from playing college to playing,
and he didn't
ball.
go back. He obviously played the Mike Morgan pitcher.
I mean, he might have gone back at some point, but
no, he played. No, he didn't ever play in the minors. The whole idea is that they never played in the minors. What happens is if you didn't play in the minors and you washed out of the majors, you just didn't play baseball anymore.
Well, I also thought, like, what if they got hurt and had to rehab?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, this list has guys that never, for whatever reason, ever did that, which is kind of interesting because, Max Scherzer was in the minor leagues this year. So you think if a Hall of Famer can do that late in his career.
Anybody can.
Maybe they didn't do that as much, at that point. Didn't put him in the minor leagues for rehab starts and stuff like that. That seems to be a more
common,
more recent thing to a degree. Denny Walling, a good infielder. I'm trying to think. So let's see who else. At number 10, I've got David Clyde, who came out in 1973. So we're talking 50 years ago on the cover of Sports Illustrated. The fireballing left-handed Texas, pitcher who just never did very much in the pros.
I mean, I think it's got to be so hard to put so much pressure on.
So much pressure. This guy, and he's got quite the story, David Clyde. You can read about it. And he talked about the feeling that he had. And he kind of he had a glimmers a couple times of being really good, and they leaned on him early, but he just couldn't sustain it and wasn't any good. Dave Winfield was a great college player.
I think Winfield's probably now the best guy.
Right. Hall of Famer, obviously, would mean, because he's the only Hall of Famer on this list. The only other notable players, Dave Roberts actually is one of the guys on the list, the current manager of the Dodgers.
That's cool.
Yeah, so he played in 72. These are all early 70s because until 65, right? And the first guy was Mike Adamson in 67 after the draft. And then Bert Hooton, Happy Hooton, who was a knuckleball pitcher and a good major league pitcher for a long time. Probably the other more notable player.
Right.
Not a Hall of Famer, but a fine major league pitcher, as the saying goes.
It's surprising that a knuckleballer, but I guess with a knuckleballer, you'd know pretty early on whether or not it's just going to work. It either does or doesn't.
So, and I probably should qualify it. So I can't say I'm 100% sure that they never went to the minors in any rehab start. They just went straight to the major leagues.
I think that, yeah.
So make sure that's qualified. So then you have all the other guys before 1965, and it's a list of amazing players.
Right, which is very interesting how this list is so much more distinguished than the post-free agency list.
And I would say that anything that happens before, I think Branch Rickey started the farm system with the Cardinals in, I want to say 36 or 1938, somewhere around then is where he kind of did that. And he took it wherever he went after that, the Dodgers and so on and so forth. So everything that happens before that. So the first guy on the list is Mel Ott.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
Mel Ott, 511 home runs, Hall of Famer. Okay.
Number 2, Al Kaline.
Hall of Famer.
So I think part of the reason for this is that it was a lot easier. There was less of an incentive for minor league baseball and contract manipulation because of the way the reserve clause worked. That if you had a stud 19-year-old, why would you hold him back?
But it was still something, I think, to put a young player like Al Kaline, because he played in 59 was his, or 53 was his rookie season. That's a lot more recent than Mel Ott, who played in 1926. So the idea that you would put a kid in there in 53 was a much different feeling than 19. I don't know how the hell Mel Ott did it in 1926. He must have been treated horribly by
He
those
probably
guys.
was treated terribly until he showed he was good.
Another Hall of Famer, Epirixi, a pitcher who you've heard me talk about a little bit.
I don't know much about him.
Great pitcher, Hall of Famer, but he came up in 1912. So, we don't really talk about guys like that. Ted Lyons, we talked about him on our White Sox.
Yes, we just did.
Another Hall of Famer. So, again, the first four guys are Hall of Famers. And then there's the fifth guy, Tom Zachary, who I guess
Man with two first names.
he got to play for the 1924 champions and Senators, but basically he played for a lot of lousy teams, which is why you never heard about him, and he's not a Hall of Famer.
But the next guy,
Frankie Frisch, is a Hall of Famer.
wasn't he also a White Sox?
Frankie Frisch was a Giant and a Cardinal. He was traded for Rogers Hornsby in one of the weird trades because everybody thought that the guys that traded for Hornsby got the better. The Giants got the better of the deal.
But it turned out the team that got Hornsby.
It turned out Frankie Frisch was, led him to a World Series and whatnot. Ernie Banks. Wow.
Bob Feller.
Bob Feller, straight to the majors.
So what I'm thinking, what you're seeing back then is that it was easier if you were one, because I think the level of overall talent.
I think you're right.
So that when you had these exceptionally talented players, because if we keep going down the list, you have guys like Catfish Hunter, Sandy Koufax. So I'm pretty sure the first time a scout watched Sandy Koufax pitch, he's just like, oh, yeah, no, he can go pitch in the majors.
Right.
We can't hit that.
Right. I mean, and there were other Hall of Famers like Eddie Plank, who, again, Eddie Plank pitched so long ago, Gordon, in 1901. But he pitched for the Philadelphia A's at the very beginning when they were really good. He won world champions with them. But, again, because it happened so long ago, we don't talk about it, but he went straight to the majors. Dick Groat, who was an MVP but not a Hall of Famer.
So won an MVP.
Right. It's just amazing how many guys on this list are just such better players overall.
Right. So I think what it shows you is how teams use the farm systems now so differently after free agency. And that I'm guessing that there's not much incentive to promote a guy directly to the major leagues like that. Because for one, you're probably not going to have space for him to immediately start playing, and you don't really want to have him just up in the major leagues not playing. That doesn't make any sense.
They do advance really quickly now. I think clubs are a little better about them. You think of the Orioles guys advancing. Right. You think about Julio Rodriguez, how fast he went through.
I think if you're 21, 22, and you're ripping AA pitching, they're just going to move you up now because they're not going to be like, let's wait till he's 24. What's the point of it?
And it's really hard for us, particularly as fans, and even those that may have a lot more information than we do, to evaluate the maturity of the player's ability to handle the day-to-day life of being a major league ball player.
That's something we as fans have absolutely no ability to analyze or have any insight to. And I think that blaming a player's failures on that, I don't think it's something we're suggesting. But I think it's the kind of thing where I think some guys struggle to adapt to the major league life. They struggle with having to play a game every day, having to get up and be ready every day.
And they miss mom's cooking.
Right. They just miss not having to. They're not used to playing baseball every day.
And they're, at 18 years old.
Right. What I mean by that is, they're used to playing a game, practicing every day. But that's not their day. Every single day, day in and day out.
It's not their job.
Is baseball. Right. Even when they don't feel like it.
Right.
They still have to do it. And it can be hard. You even if you've played AAA and AAU and travel baseball through college and all those really intense programs, it's never just been your entire life all the time on the road. You don't have anybody else. It's just baseball.
And you want to give the kid the shot, right? So in spring training a few years ago, and it's Pete Alonso for the Mets, played minor league baseball.
Right.
But he came in and he got the shot, and they kept him on the team, and he never looked back. But I think at age 18, if the kid's going to come up and be a guy who's never gone to the minor leagues, you drafted him out of high school or college or whatever it is, and he's got to play regularly until he plays himself out of the lineup.
Right. It's much better to have him in AA, where you can have a program much more structured to bringing him along. You can have somebody that's essentially there just to be his hand holder. And that's okay in AA, which won't fly in the majors. He's got to be ready to go once he's up there. So you could bring them along, but if he shows immediately, okay, that he's got the game to handle it, then they'll bring him up to the major league level and let them figure it out. And we saw guys can figure it out, and then they can struggle. I wonder how much that got to Alvarez last season, coming up and then being like, okay, you're the starting everyday catcher now. It seemed like it got to him, and he got a little bit tired.
And and I think that's a good point, that you do get physically tired, and just the idea of all the things you have to take care of as a young player that you haven't had to take care of before. You're traveling, you don't have your family with you for the most part to help you.
It's like, okay, now you're going to go to some city you've never been before, and okay, you need to eat. The team might not be arranging dinner that night. What do?
Now the teams are pretty good about looking after rookies and making sure they've got mentors and people there.
But once you've been up for a couple weeks, that starts to fade away.
You're supposed to be able to take care of it. He's still 20 years old.
Right. But they're like, okay, you've been here for a few weeks now. We kind of, you've got the money. We expect you to handle this.
You know how to do this now? Okay, go out and do it. We're out, man, because you can't go to the bar with us because you're only 20.
Right. And we want to go out. Okay, bye.
Yeah, so I think that makes, and again, because there's so many games and the season takes so long, I think the maturity level of the baseball player has to be higher than virtually anybody.
So I think we'll see less and less of it, but who knows? Maybe we'll still have a few phenoms that come blazing up every once.
I think if a great player comes through, I don't think they're as hesitant now to give him a shot. But you better keep it up, because once you start slumping, they're thinking about moving you down to the minor leagues.
Oh yeah.